What Ifra was trying to say that Ifra will be opening the session with introduction, and then I'll be giving the welcome address. After that, Mr. Jigme, you shall be speaking, and you will have about 15-20 minutes. And then after that, Dr. Sewang Dorji will be speaking. And at the end, Miss Chimi, you can speak. You can have your time. So I think about 15 minutes has been allocated for each one of you. But I mean, if you are in the flow and you have things to wrap up, it's fine. We can go 20 minutes, 25 minutes. That's not a problem. After that, we will be having the question and answer session, and then we shall be ending with the end note. Is that fine?
Good to me. Just want to interrupt. Sorry.
Yeah.
I do have to jump off after the exact hour. It is about 6 a.m. here in Toronto. So
Right.
if it does end up going over, I'm most likely going to have to hop off just because I do have to clock into work.
Right.
Just a heads up. Okay.
We are now live on YouTube, so we'll start the webinar now.
Okay. Yeah. If just a second, Miss Cheney, when will you have to leave? Is there a time?
Probably after the hour, but if it goes over another 15-20 minutes, I'm allowed, but rather not have it go over.
Right.
I think Indian timing beyond 6:20, 6:15.
Sure. Absolutely. We'll try to wrap up before that. Absolutely.
And then just a heads up,
maybe if it's flexible, I'm sorry, maybe if it's flexible, maybe she can go ahead.
Yeah, I'm also wondering, Ifra, is that fine if Miss?
That's fine.
Okay, sure. Okay, great.
Angela? Dr. Angela is here.
I don't see his video. Dr. Sewang, are you with us? No.
He has not joined yet.
Okay.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Ifra, and I am a research associate at Red Lantern Analytica. I'd like to extend a hearty welcome to all the speakers and distinguished guests. We are really honored to have you with us in the webinar that has been organized by Team Red Lantern Analytica. Red Lantern Analytica is an international affairs observer group that is based out of New Delhi, India. It focuses on critical issues that are related to China, with special focus on Sino-India relations, issues of national and international security, energy and environment. The main aim of our organization is to draw in India's foremost academic institutions and security intelligentsia, corporate institutions, monetary establishments, and experts in discussion on India's foreign policy and extend the country's role in global issues. To maximize the institutional and scholarly capacity of strategic thinking in India, we are required to integrate expertise in our research in order to foster an even-minded international strategy for India. This is a young organization that is in constant search for fresh ideas and thoughts in the strategic studies discourse. With this goal in mind, we have set up ourselves as an autonomous and a solitary international strategy think tank. We are an intellectual startup functioning with a small number of individuals who are passionate about international affairs. So again, I would like to welcome you all, and today's session will be moderated by Sindhu, who is a research scholar and a development practitioner. I would now request Sindhu to take over the further session as the moderator. Over to you, Sindhu.
Thank you, Ifra. Thank you so much. Good evening and a very warm welcome to all joining with us here today. I am Sindhu, and on behalf of Red Lantern Analytica, I welcome you all to today's webinar, where the topic of deliberation is CCP's violent crackdown of Tibetan national identity and the Free Tibet movement. This is the latest in a series of webinars on contemporary issues of conflict all around the world, hosted by Red Lantern Analytica. For this discussion, we have with us today, and we are grateful to be joined by Mr. Jigme Tsulstrim, Dr. Sewang Dorji, and Ms. Shemi Lamo. So, as we all know, that Tibet was invaded by China in 1950, and since then, Tibet has been living under Chinese occupation and oppression. Even after more than 70 years of occupation, the Tibetans continue to resist China's rule and defy its oppression. So, it is in the light of recent events of the CCP's crackdown on the Tibetan nationals and refugees that we host this webinar. So, first speaker in our webinar will be Mr. Jigme Tsulstrim. I shall be introducing Mr. Jigme. Mr. Jigme is presently the coordinator in the India-Tibet Coordination Office in Lajpat Nagar, New Delhi. He has been serving in this post since August 2019 till now. He has been responsible for coordinating among various Indian Tibet support groups on issues that are pertaining to Tibet's identity, self-determination, human rights, and seeking of genuine autonomy for Tibet within the framework of People's Republic of China. Mr. Jigme, over to you. You can start.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sunduji, and all the other colleagues. I take this opportunity on behalf of India-Tibet Coordination Office to first express my gratitude for inviting and having me here at this Red Lantern Analytica webinar. I'm sure my other two colleagues, they'll be engaging with more on facts and figures, especially the research part. But since my office is engaged with more of activism from street to Sansad, that's the parliament. And having said that, I would like to draw a few points regarding what this office is all about. So this is about the awareness campaign among the Indian masses, and especially amongst the media, school institutions, universities, and also within the political, political corners of the government and the state government of India. And having said that, initially in 1980s, we have this office with the name of India Desk, which is based in Delhi, in the Bureau Office of His Holiness Dalai Lama. Then it got moved to Dharamsala, which remained functional under the Department of Information and International Relations Office. But then later in 2002, we had a huge meeting of more than 270 Tibet supporters from all across India. And then we realized that somewhere in India, although from 1960s and 60s and 80s onwards, the movement of Tibet support groups, especially in India, has been remarkably, very high, very active. But then somewhere down the line, I think it was seen more going downward. So in order to have it more impressive, and then to make sure that what is being done by the right hand, it's comfortably being known to the left hand. So keeping that in mind, then this office, India Tibet Coordination Office, came into existence in 2002 with this meeting held at Rewari, which is like 30 kilometers from New Delhi. And then the two objectives this office has is to understand the situation inside Tibet as of today under the Chinese regime for the last 50 plus or 60 plus years. And then knowing what has been developing inside Tibet, and then depending on that, what CTA has been framing the policy, how it is being executed in India and elsewhere, and especially in the 11 states of India, in 46 different settlements in India, then this office has the responsibility to come out and reach out to the Indian masses. So in this regard, I'll be touching some of those incidents and experiences, which I'm sure the attendants or the participants of today's webinar, they may have some kind of understanding. I'm sure when this meeting, when this webinar, CCP's violent crackdown of Tibetan movement, identity and free Tibet movement, what you have organized here, I'm sure all of you must be knowing what Tibet is, what China is. But then, since India, in terms of its landscape, it's huge. Mr. Sandesh Meshram comes here exactly in the scene. And Mr. Sandesh Meshram, he is one of the regional convener of the western region of India that includes Mumbai, Maharashtra, and of course Goa. And he has undertaken a cycle rally from 2014 and then 2016, 17, like more than 4 or 5 times. And he has covered almost 25,000 kilometers. And in one of the incidents, especially when he was moving through Chhattisgarh and Telangana in those Naxalite belts, the simple message that his bicycle has, is that free Tibet, save India. In the front, that's written in English, and in the back, that's written in Hindi. And some of those local residents, they come up asking what fee we are getting, Lifebuoy, toothpaste, Colgate, what kind of, So this is one of the reality today. Especially, I would also like to remind here, 2021, when Tenzin Sundula, the activist that all of us know, he initiated a peace march on the very first day of the Tibetan lunar calendar. And then he started that peace march from Dharamsala, ended on the 10th of March 2021 in New Delhi. Now, just 50 kilometers across Dharamsala, where we are there for the last 60 plus years, many of those people in Jalandhar or Ludhiana, while Tenzin Sundula was going across, having 2 national flags, both Tibetan and the Indian one. So some of them, they have been approaching, asking why Tibet is having this issue. Our neighbors, we share the border with China. So that is the basic thing that we need to change. And especially now, what happened in 2017, what happened in 2020, Doklam and Galwan and then Pangong. Now these things have also has given an opportunity for more to understand about the real existence of the border between India and Tibet. Having said that, my office deals with more than 18 different organizations, those who have different ideological backgrounds, like Bharat-Tibet Maitri Sangh. Bharat-Tibet Maitri Sangh, it's more of a socialist background, having its roots from 1950s and 60s onward, from Jayaprakash Narayan to Ram Manohar Lohia, to Madhu Lime, to MC Chagla, then George Saab and Mohan Singh, then Ravi Rai, and so on and so forth. And just to quote here one undocumented incident is when His Holiness visited India in 1956 at the invitation of so-called Mahabuddhi Society of India, 2500 Buddha anniversary in India. The then Prime Minister Pandit Nehruji, of course, extended His Holiness as a state guest of India. And His Holiness, accompanied with Pension Rinpoche, visited India and toured India from Bhakra Nangal Dam in Punjab to this Nagarjuna Sagar Konda in Andhra Pradesh. And during that trip, the then political officer of Sikkim, Abba Pant also organized a meeting with His Holiness with Jayaprakash Narayan. But that was happened in the disguise of a peasant form. Otherwise, Chow Enlai was also there, so he could be in a doubt, he could be in a suspicion that why, because Jayaprakash Narayan was a tall figure in the Indian politics of socialism. Now see, just after His Holiness landed, then after 5 years or 4 years, 1959, 1959, when His Holiness has reached at the border of so-called NEFA at that time, Northeast Frontier Agency, and 24th of April, when Nehruji came and formally invited His Holiness at Birla Bhavan in Mussoorie, just a month later, on the 30th of May, under the leadership of Jayaprakash Narain, this Himalayan Bachao Andolan has just started. And that's how the flame of Tibet Mukti Sadhana, the Yatra, has just started up. Then by 1990s, now you can have another organization called Bharat Tibet Sahyog Manch, which is more of nationalist, which is more of a different sort of ideological background. And then along with that, we have Himalayan Buddhist Cultural Association that involves all the states that is stretched from Ladakh to Arunachal Pradesh. And then we have the Gandhiwadi, the Gandhi idealism, more inclined towards Gandhian philosophy, like Antarashtriya Bharat Tibet Sahyog Samiti, which has its base in Meerut. And along with that, we have also the thoughts of Ambedkarwadi, and that is more based from Maharashtra. That's called National Campaign for Free Tibet. And then we have another Youth Liberation Front of Tibet and Manchuria, which is more based in Haryana, Rewari, and this part of Katwaria Sarai. So likewise, we have many organizations now in India which are actively working for the cause of Tibet and making sure that at least people know about what's happening on the other side of India. So having said that, we try to engage through universities, through street, through protest, and we try to organize a different sort of platform that makes sure that yes, this is the realistic thing that we have been facing, that we have been challenging today forth with. And accordingly, we are also making sure, now when you pronounce my name, Jigme, so see, Jig and Me, these are two different words. Okay, Jig means fear and Me means it's a antonium. It's called less, what you call in Hindi or in Sanskrit, it's called Me, means a. So in Hindi, fear means bhai and Me means a, so it becomes abhay. Now see, therefore, Tibet shares so much, similarities with India in terms of literature, in terms of everything. Now you have a text, you have those philosophical shastras or those texts which when you read Hanuman Chalisa, you just read straight away. But when we read the Pratitya Samutpat Sutra, we always have a salutation to the Indian gurus or Indian masters, Indian panditas in the Sanskrit word. Yeah. I'm sorry, I get some.
Yeah, I think there was a temporary network issue. Just
Indication. Can I continue?
yes, Mr. Jigme. Now you're audible.
Okay, so how many minutes do I have still?
From
my end,
you can take another 5 minutes. You can wrap it up by that.
It seems I would like to finish with some of those basic inputs here. Is that this office based from New Delhi is to try and reach out as many as Indian masses in institutions, in villages, in hamlets, and try to organize those campaigns and then to make sure that people really comes to the government as well as state government. We have our own website called India-Tibet.net that is purely in Hindi. But then when we have that are printed, one of the seventh member of the fifth
Hello, it sounds like you were just cutting off quite often.
Yeah, we apologize for the network issue. I think there is some technical issue being faced. Uh, yeah, Mr. Jigme, the last part of your speech, in fact, your video is still static. I think there is some network problem that you're facing.
Cindy, perhaps we can move on to Tandujla, and then we can go back to Jamila when he is.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, sure, that works, that works. Mr. Jigme, I think, is it okay with you that if we move on to, yeah, Mr. Jigme,
to save audio highlights.
okay, so we are really apologetic for this technical snag that we are facing. Uh, we will get back to Mr. Jigme and so we get back to Jigme and okay, anyways, anyways. So with permission from Mr. Jigme, I would like to move on to the next
Permission from
speaker.
Mr. Jigme, I would like to move on to the next speaker.
Is there a double echo? I'm
Is there a
hearing.
double echo? I'm hearing.
Okay, I think now it's fine.
Okay, I think now it's fine.
I would like to invite Miss Chemi Lamo, who is currently the community health lead at Parkdale People's Economy, the Canadian representative for International Tibet Network's steering committee, and a board member of the Parkdale Neighborhood Land Trust. She is a former U of Mosaic Fellow and a School of Cities Fellow at the University of Toronto, Canada. Shemi has previously served as the CEO or president, among many other roles, at the Students' Union at U of Mosaic, Scarborough, along with the board of Canadian Tibetan Association of Ontario and SFT Canada. I hand over to you, Ms. Chemi.
Thank you for that introduction. I'm just going to quickly share my screen as well, so hopefully you folks can see my presentation along with my, and hopefully you can hear me as well. Yeah, sounds good. Thanks. All right, let's get started. Well, thank you, Red Lantern, for having me here. It's a pleasure to join you from all the way from Toronto on the other side of the world. It's quite early morning here. And given the topic, which is the ongoing human rights violations inside of Tibet and also regarding our sort of current freedom movement, it's quite the topic. But I just wanted to introduce myself as Chimi, a Tibetan who's been born and raised in exile. I'm not a sort of expert or a historian. However, I would like to share the stories of our Tibetans and speak to you today about the human rights violations inside my homeland, Pur, which actually is going through very similar tactics that are used to uphold the violations in a lot of other occupied regions like East Turkestan. We've seen the assault of democracy in Hong Kong, Taiwan, and perhaps in the end of my presentation, I can also touch a little bit about Indo-Tibet relations in the sort of current situations. And I would lean on you folks actually to have an engaging discussion moving forward. So before I begin, I just wanted to first share that I'm currently joining in from Toronto, Canada, which is actually stolen land. And so for me, for someone who comes from stolen land, to be on stolen land, it's very important that I acknowledge that we're on the unceded territory of the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. And it's also treaty. It's also home to many treaties, including the one that is called One Dish with One Spoon, which was an agreement that was made by allied nations, the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe, to peaceably share and care for the resources until it runs out. So I would like to pay my respects. Oh, looks like. All right. So now let's take a look at real China. It's important that we understand who exactly we're talking about. So if you take a look at the map, you see that China actually is quite small in the right corner. It's comprised of a lot of other occupied or politically and military controlled entities, and of course a lot of other spaces that it claims that it has control over. I want to strictly mention before I begin that Tibet was historically an independent nation, and only after the illegal and violent occupation of Tibet, and of course the continuation of Chinese repressive policies, which they continue to implement to eradicate the Tibetan identity in every way possible, is what we see now. That looks like this. Technically, the size of Tibet should make Tibet today's world's 10th largest country. But since then, it has been divided up, renamed, and incorporated into Chinese provinces. And what China calls, what was used to be and what is to Tibetans, Kham, Amdo, and Uzang is now, divided into Kham, Amdo, which is now Qinghai. There's Kham, which now turns into Sichuan, and then Guangsu and Yunnan areas. Before I move on, I want to quickly mention that take a look at this map and see where exactly India borders with China in this map. There's actually not a lot of space in that you can find, unless one argues that East Turkestan is, what you call now Xinjiang region, and perhaps in that north region, that little piece where China may possibly, given that it is again occupied nation, China actually does not even border India. So that's something to note for the end of my presentation. And now to go back into history, just to give you a little bit of context for folks who probably don't know, but if you do know, I'm just going to quickly run through this. Of course, occupation happened in 1950s. In 1959, March 10th, hundreds of thousands of Tibetans, when they found out that His Holiness the Dalai Lama's life might be in danger, they came out to the Nobulinga Palace trying to prevent His Holiness the Dalai Lama from accepting the PLA's invitation. On the 17th of March, Chinese artillery was aimed at the palace and hence led to His Holiness the Dalai Lama evacuating into neighboring India. And since then, the situation inside of Tibet has only worsened. So much so that in the last 5 years in a row, the US think tank Freedom House has actually ranked Tibet among all of political and civil liberties in the world, the least free place. With that said, every aspect of the Tibetan life is under siege, be it political oppression, cultural, religious suppression, erasure of our language, even socio and economic discrimination that happens inside of Tibet. So we're going to dive quickly into all of these different topics. First and foremost, political oppression and violence. Peaceful protests are suppressed with severe violence. When we take a look at prisons, they're filled with Tibetan people that are detained for simply expressing their desire for freedom, or even caught with a photo of the Dalai Lama. Tibetans are often denied, once arrested, to get any sort of proper legal support and get a fair trial of any kind. Tibetans are often charged with separatism, and with that charge, they can face up to as much as including a death penalty for simply being Tibetan. And these type of oppressive laws do not even exempt children. Moving on to cultural and religious repression, it's pretty obvious that the Chinese government sees Tibetan Buddhism as a threat, which is why with the current appointment of Wang Zhuzheng as the political leader of the Tibetan region, he has promised to sinicize Tibetan Buddhism completely. Since 2016, we saw the destruction of the largest Buddhist institute, not just in Tibet, but in the world. And thousands and thousands of nuns, monks, and other Buddhist practitioners were not only evicted, but all of their homes were demolished. And all of these removals continue to this day. Larungar is the largest institute that we've named, but there's also other religious sites that have been sort of completely demolished. And if you take a look, this is what Larungar used to look like, and we see right after this is sort of the picture and the situation. This is in 2016. And within the year, you can see how much has changed in Larungar specifically. And while we're on the topic of cultural and religious suppression, this Tibetan flag is deemed illegal. Having access to, or having this national flag or singing the national anthem would be completely banned. And speaking to, again, the religious context, just months ago, this is a 99-foot Buddha statue in Drago, Tibet, where it was completely demolished. This was built by the locals with the local authorities' permission and had fundraised together. They put their pools, money all together to be able to build this. It's like almost like when Indians come together to build a mandir, And so similarly, that was built, and now it was completely demolished. Not only demolished, anybody who was sharing information about the demolition, the demolishing of this statue were actually detained as well. And we're speaking about religious and sort of advocacy spaces, but even writers, singers, teachers, artists are constantly jailed for, addressing or trying to preserve their Tibetan identity and any sort of criticism against the Chinese rule. And with that said, the Chinese government is hell-bent on trying to eliminate the Tibetan identity in every way possible. And when it comes to cultural preservation, one key thing about an identity is the language. And that's exactly what the Chinese government is trying to do. This is Tashi Wangchuk. He was recently released. However, he was detained and jailed for 5 years for so-called inciting separatism. This man is a herder who was then turned into a shop owner, and when he used to come back home, he realized that his niece and nephews are no longer able to speak in Tibetan because their local schools were teaching in Chinese. And I was scared that, his niece and nephews will no longer be able to communicate with with their grandparents. He started to look into the Chinese constitution, and he actually brought up that under the Chinese constitutions, so-called ethnic minorities have the right to practice their own language or learn their own language in these local schools. And using the Chinese constitution, he had taken to court, and he actually did prior to court. I mean, because he didn't really get anywhere, but he did a interview with New York Times, which landed him the 5 years, and he's just one of the people, right? So till this day, he's been released, although he's not technically fully free because there's a lot of house arrest regulations placed upon him. This is Gosharab Gyatso. He is still in prison, just like thousands and thousands of others who get imprisoned and detained for simply sending money to India or talking to their relatives outside of Tibet. Gosharab Gyatso is a renowned Tibetan writer, intellectual, monk, and he's been sentenced for 10 years inside of prison. With all that said and done, this is a report that actually came out by Tibet Action Institute just the end of last year, a couple months ago, and it's actually horrendous. If anybody is aware of residential schools, which was used by sort of the Brits and so the European colonizers in what is now called North America, that's exactly what they're doing. About almost 1 million children, 800 to 900,000 children, Tibetan children, 80% of children are being forced to go to colonial state boarding schools. They're being ripped away from their parents to be forced into schools where they would be taught Mandarin and then they would forget their complete identity. And that is what's happening. This is the groundbreaking research that has come out recently. And, the amount of access we have to Tibet is limited. And with the limited information, we found out that this many Tibetan children have been being forced to leave their family members and homes to be attending these colonial boarding schools, so that the Tibetan identity could be absolutely erased. Now, I could go on and on forever, but in terms of social and economic discrimination, here, let me give you an example, right? When it comes to the authority in these, even at the local counties inside of so-called Tibetan autonomous regions, most of them are Han Chinese. So, that is a testament to whether or not Tibetans do have autonomy. And here is a blogger who actually spoke to Human Rights Watch and said, getting a passport for a Tibetan is actually harder than getting into heaven. So if this doesn't tell you anything about preferential policies or discrimination that happens to Tibetans on a daily basis, I don't know what would. Moving on, there's also the environmental destruction lens, right? Environmental lens. And I'm from the introduction that Red Lantern was doing earlier, it seems like you folks are interested in this global conversation on climate. Before I even start talking about how important Tibet is, let me just state that China is by far the world's largest emitter of greenhouse gases. And, there is a strategic reason to why Tibet plays a really important role for China in many senses, but specifically when it comes to environment. Tibet is the water tower of Asia. It is the source of 10 major river systems, even including the Brahmaputra, the Salween, the Sutlej, the Yellow River, Yangtze, Mekong. It provides irrigation, power, and drinking water for actually over almost I would say 1.5 billion people in Asia. That's nearly 20% of the world's population. And we're just talking about water here. Tibet is rich in natural resources, including gold, copper, water, which is being right now used for by the Chinese government to fuel its economic and industrial expansion. Tibet is known as the third pearl of the world for a reason, And so with all that said, in all of these different ways, the Chinese government has been strategically trying to eliminate the Tibetan identity in every way possible. This is a map of the self-immolations that have taken place by Tibetans inside of Tibet. This is an act of defiance, them speaking out and telling the world, international world, it's an outcry to basically listen and say that they're sharing that they're not happy under the Chinese regime. They've called for basic human rights and the return of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And if you actually notice where all these red dots are, you can see that they're not actually as many in the Tibetan Autonomous Region, which again, people inside of Tibet are naturally telling the international world what the true map of Tibet is. Trigger warning, this is one of the people that we often sometimes get lost in statistics and numbers. This is Lama Chozo in November 2012. Now, moving on to exile, Tibetans in exile, we represent about 2%, I would say, of the larger population. The Tibetans in exile, go through their own set of challenges of statelessness, identity crisis, having democracy in exile, decolonizing our struggle. But the Chinese government makes sure that that also is not easy for us in exile. There is Chinese influences happening all over the campuses, in academic institutions. And this is something that I went through personally in 2019 when I ran to become the president of the University of Toronto Scarborough. These are some of the threats that I received. These are death threats and rape threats, not just against me, but my family members. It has escalated to every level, higher level of security that you can imagine in the Canadian government. I've testified there in various spots. However, till this day, there is no sort of accountability on sort of the Chinese government's end or the Chinese embassy or these students that have actually committed a criminal offense by sending out death threats and rape threats. Here is actually a protest that we did, but speaking to, again, in continuation with the Chinese government's influence outside of China in all of these Western worlds and also just outside of China. Confucius Institute is an institute that operates to basically brainwash under the facade of a cultural program in all of these in all of these academic institutions outside of China. So TTSB is the local school board. So basically elementary school, going to grade 1, grade 2, children are being, TTSB, being the school board, they were actually going to create a partnership with the Confucius Institute. Confucius Institute present themselves as just a cultural program. And then after making the deal, they start investing in you tremendously. Soon enough, they will decide what exactly will be taught in your school. And this was almost supposed to happen in Toronto, but we organized. We came together, we protested, and out of the 24 trustees, initially only 2 were going to say no. But after we protested and came together, 21 out of the 24 trustees actually voted no for the deal. So it actually didn't end up going through. But Confucius Institute to this day exists in so many academic institutions around the world, specifically in America, Australia, and Canada. And so the work is ongoing. I know you're all asked for today was about also the freedom movement. So I wanted to quickly touch upon our movement. Our movement, our nonviolent movement, is highly, dependent on mass participation, discipline, and strategies. And when I talk about strategies, there are various strategies that we take on. First and foremost, increasing the cultural, political, and social organizing spaces inside of Tibet, to creating a new generation of Tibetan leaders, leaders within the Tibetan movement, increasing the global awareness about China's oppressive policies inside of Tibet and all of our allied nations. And also, along with this concept of raising global awareness, I think one must understand that there is international peace at stake when CCP continues to expand. As it continues its expansionist aims, we must understand that it's not just a Tibetan issue or the Hong Kong issue or Taiwan issue, it's now going to be a world issue. And our job as advocates or activists is to make sure that the occupation inside of Tibet by China is very expensive, economically, socially, and politically. And of course, we believe that it is possible. What we do is we take on education and training programs for young people to come together. These are some of the photos of our gatherings. These are grassroots organizings that we do all across. And also nonviolent direct action. This is live from 2008 Beijing. Direct action again on the Golden Bridge. And this is this year in Greece. you see these security folks running around. They're trying to basically tackle us. But we were successfully able to make sure that the whole world who was watching the Beijing Olympics, at least the Olympic torch ceremony, heard our voice. And that's that. I could go on about CCP authoritarianism, but I think I will stop here. And I want to quickly just say things about the Indo-Tibet border. There's a lot of things that are currently happening with the Indo-Tibet situation, and a specific focus on the end of last year, around the end of 2021, beginning of 2022. We saw a lot of things happen, especially in terms of aggression by China. And so I quickly want to just name those things rather than jumping into it. And if folks have any questions, happy to address them later on. Here is another reminder of the border. December 23rd, we saw the All-Party Indian Parliamentary Forum. But just a week after, we saw the Chinese government, make an announcement about standardized names that they made of a lot of about 15 places, which are counties, rivers, and counties, mountains, and rivers, where they would synthesize their names. For example, Tuting of Arunachal Pradesh was Duodeng, or River Siom was Siyumi, or they're making these strategic things. Remember what I said at the beginning of my presentation, where regions of Tibet were renamed, remapped into Chinese provinces. That is happening here, right? And on the 30th of December, Chinese government actually released another statement saying they have never recognized Arunachal Pradesh, which is, clearly a state of India at the moment. December 31st, we saw the Chinese embassy, sending letters to Indian MPs. Just on January 1st, and I recommend everyone to watch this. It's a Chinese flag over the Galwan Valley, and along with that, at the background, if you actually translate what has been written at the back of the big rock, it says "not an inch of land," which we often hear Prime Minister Modi talk about when he refers to the conflict situation, saying that we've not lost an inch of land. This is a direct threat by the Chinese government to India, and we've seen the bridges being built around the Pangong Tso Lake. However, I wanted to end on a good note. On January 4th, we also saw the Indian and the SFF, Special Frontier Force Army, raise an Indian flag in the Galwan Valley area. And I want to remind folks the contribution that Special Frontier Force has made to India and the role Tibet plays for India's security. As you can see, there is a map at the back. And I think I didn't grow up in India for too long, but all I remember in one of the protests, or in many of our protests, is Tibet ki azadi, Bharat ki suraksha. And with that said, I just want to leave you by saying that no one is free until everyone is free. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. And thank you for allowing me to go a little over time as well. Cheers.
Thank you so much, Shemi, for a very informative tour through the contemporary reality in Tibet and also the historical background. You managed to touch upon various aspects, including the environmental concern as well. So hopefully we will get back to it later if there's a question on it. Right now, I will move on to our next speaker, Dr. Sewang Dorji. I will just give a brief introduction of Dr. Sewang. Dr. Sewang is a research fellow of the Tibet Policy Institute, a Dharamshala-based think tank of the Central Tibetan Administration. He holds a PhD in international relations. He has been researching on Tibet and the Himalayas. He writes on the geostrategic importance of Tibet in the Sino-Indian relations, China's Tibet policy, India-China conflicts over the Indo-Tibetan border, and rise of China and its implications in South Asia. His research works have been published in both national and international journals and media as well. Over to you, Dr. Sewang Dorji. Welcome.
Thank you, Sidhu. Am I audible?
You are, absolutely.
Sure. Yeah, and without taking much time, so I go to my paper. And before that, good evening to all and good morning to Chimilamala. who is in Canada. And so this is my working paper. And it's my privilege to share my research finding to this webinar. Actually, this is my working paper, so it doesn't matter, but I will share my findings. And most of my findings are thoroughly researched by the Tibetan scholars who lived and educated under the regime of the Communist Party in Tibet and China. So, whatever China's implementation of policies in Tibet are good for nothing. These all are making China's way of militarization of Tibet and sinicizing the Tibetan identity and culture in the Chinese socialistic path that China used to call Chinese socialistic characteristic. The fact is that China doesn't want Tibetan people and its culture and identity, but China wants Tibetan land and resources. That's why China violently cracked down the Tibetan national identity in Tibet to undermine the Tibetan freedom movement in Tibet. In fact, China invaded Tibet in 1950. It has been almost 71 years. During these years, the Tibetans have been suffering under the Chinese suppression. Though China could control Tibet physically, but China could not control the Tibetan spirit, that is Tibetan identity. Therefore, China's leadership systematically cracked down Tibetan monastic community, indoctrinating Tibetan primary kids and sending Tibetan nomads and farmers in labor camp. But China called these measures as maintaining stability in Tibet. So this is a serious matter for us and the Tibetan civilization. For China, stability of Tibet means militarization of Tibet, destroying the Tibetan civilization. In fact, the Tibetan people reject the Chinese legitimacy over Tibet. Therefore, in order to win the Tibetan hearts and mind, China started indoctrinating Tibetan kids in the form of military training and education, and forcefully introducing the patriotic education in Tibetan monastic community. This China's policy in Tibet has serious repercussions to preservation of Tibetan identity and culture in Tibet. Obviously, it has geopolitical implications to Tibet's neighboring country, including India. Overall, China's Tibet policy is making Tibet stability for securing China's national interests and territorial integrity. This strategy is openly implemented by the Chinese President Xi Jinping. The Chinese President Xi Jinping's governing Tibet strategy is in court. To govern the country well, we must first govern the frontier well. And to govern the frontier well, we must first ensure the stability in Tibet. It means the stability of Tibet concerns the Chinese national interest and its international moral image, which deals with the secure Indo-Tibet border. In order to secure the Indo-Tibet border, China emphasized on border expansion, border infrastructure, and border security. This strategy is implemented by the Chinese President Xi Jinping during the 7th Tibet Work Forum in 2020. The Tibet Work Forum is the highest decision-making body which deals with the Tibetan affairs. The Chinese military activity across the Tibet, including special military recruiting, Tibetan college graduate youth, and giving military-style training to the Tibetan primary kids, and deploying the military to Tibet border region, that's we used to call Indo-Tibet border. Xi Jinping's recent Tibet visit, 2020, the special forcefully sending Tibetans are in the labor camp. Moreover, the Tibetans across Tibet are subjugated to genetic engineering, so that is very serious implication. So I will come after some time, the genetic engineering in Tibet. So all these are systematic Chinese plan to complete the eradication of Tibetan culture and identity. In fact, China is destroying one of the oldest Asian civilization, that is Tibetan civilization. The Tibetan civilization served both strategic buffer and peace bridge between South Asia and East Asia for more than hundreds of thousands years. In fact, it is in India and China at the current. By China's military occupation of Tibet, and destroying the strategic importance of Tibet as the dawn of peace between India and China. So it has serious implication and impact for creating 18th century in near future. So this is the basic that all China's policy in Tibet. Let's come to the today's topic more precisely. So the China's exploitation and crackdown the Tibetan identity in terms of Tibetans have been forcefully sent into labor camp, forcefully recruiting into PLA, the People's Liberation of Army, and Tibetans have been subjugated to genetic engineering. With this, I try to expose the China's cheating agenda, or we can use to call the long-term China strategy behind China's strategy in Tibet. My first point is that converting Tibetan Buddhism in China's socialist characteristic and China's violation of the religious freedom in Tibet. So this is serious implication, or this is serious problem in Tibet. So I won't go through very detail about, but I will go through a very recent way what China has done to in terms of the violation of the religious freedom in Tibet. In April 2020, China's authority has introduced a policy in code of conduct for prime party members in Tibet Autonomous Region on belief and religion for trial implementation. So this is the policy China has adopted recently to subjugate the Tibetan religious freedom in Tibet. Yes, this policy has been issued order to party cadre of the Tibet Autonomous Region to not follow the Tibetan Buddhism. It also standardized the minimum requirement of joining Tibetan youth in the monastic community, which is 18 years above. So this policy is officially adopted and implemented in so-called Tibet Autonomous Region. In fact, China's authority has applied regulation to other parts of Tibet region. For instance, in the name of regulations such as religious affair of Qinghai province in October 2021 and approval system for newly added temples, monks, nuns for religious activities set 12 November 2021. So these are the Chinese the policies and regulations to crack down the religious freedom in Tibet. For that, the Chinese authority has recently expelled over 80 monks from the eastern part of Tibet. These 80 expelled monks are accused to be not acquired the minimum requirement of age, that is 18 years above, to join the monastic community. This newly implemented Chinese state regulation is mentally targeted to convert the Tibetan Buddhism in the Chinese socialist characteristic, which is signature strategy of China's policy directed by the Chinese President Xi Jinping in 2020. The silent feature of this regulation are to dismantle the Tibetan Buddhist monastic education, maintaining minimum age requirement to admit a Tibetan youth in monastic community that is 18 years above, and giving restriction to Tibetans in engaging religious affair and ceremonies in Tibet. The aim of this regulation is to make distance the Tibetan youth from the Tibetan Buddhist monastic community and reducing the Tibetan Buddhist faith and its influence in Tibet and across. The ultimate objective of this regulation is to sinicizing the Tibetan Buddhist culture and converting the Tibetan Buddhism into the Chinese characteristic that Xi Jinping keep telling today. Decreasing number of monks and nuns in the monastic education and the Chinese demolition of the monasteries, stupas, Buddha statues are a serious threat to preservation of Tibetan Buddhist culture in Tibet. So this is very serious implication, and it has repercussion too, not only in Tibet and South Asian countries also. My third point here is that the labor came in Tibet. After Cultural Revolution in Tibet, Chinese concentration came, or we can call the forced labor came a bit relaxed in Tibet. But since last 2 decades, the Chinese authority has reinstalled the old system. That is, the Tibetans are forced to send into the labor camp for further incorporating into the Chinese economic and social system. That is systematically monitoring by the Chinese government to the Tibetan population. Especially, the Tibetan farmers and nomads are targeted. And in fact, after Cultural Revolution, these Tibetan farmers and nomads are not directly comes under the Chinese Communist Party's monitoring system, or you can say the surveillance. So, because the Tibetan farmers are farming in the village and nomads are grazing their animals on the vast Tibetan pasture. Therefore, it's very difficult for Chinese authority to control their daily lives and movement. Therefore, the Tibetan farmers and nomads are backbone of the preservation of Tibetan culture and identity, which China hardly sanitized them. To destroy the traditional Tibetan livelihood system, China introduced many vocational training schemes to bring the Tibetan nomads and farmers into urban life. It seems that nothing wrong with the Chinese program to bringing Tibetan youth into the urban life, either in Tibet or in the mainland China. If we deeply analyze this initiative, it has two main hidden agenda to complete destroying the Tibetan traditional way of life. The first hidden agenda of China is that to destroy the Tibetan way of life. So that is the Tibetan identity and culture. To achieve this, the China makes the Tibetan youth to keep distance their traditional way of life. The Tibetan identity and culture are inseparable from the Tibetan Buddhism and its culture. For that, Tibetan monasteries are center for the preservation of Tibetan identity and Tibetan culture. For giving the vocational training in labor camp for Tibetan youth and indoctrinating them to create the disconnection between their relation with the spiritual and traditional way of life. In fact, China tried to make them physically Tibetan but mentally in Chinese. In order to achieve first the hidden agenda, China strategized the second plan, that is, to send the Tibetan youth to mainland Chinese city. This strategy has long-term impact on Tibetans for their way of thinking. In the name of property elevation in Tibet, China has sent the Tibetan youth to mainland Chinese city for getting vocational training. Whatever Tibetan wants to do something in terms of skill or vocational training course in Tibet, they have no choice, but they have go to mainland China. For this incident, there is no vocational training center in Tibet. So all the vocational training centers are in China. If China really concerns about the life skills, vocational trainings to the Tibetan people, why not China establish the vocational trainings in Tibet? Why China has sending Tibetan youth to China? For this instance, there is no vocational training center in Tibet. If China really wants to care about the unemployment problem in Tibet, why don't they establish such a center in Tibet? So this is the serious caution for Chinese government, but their sincerity towards the Tibetans and Tibet. So this is the serious caution for the Chinese authority, how sincerity their effort to sending Tibetans in labor camp. Sending Tibetans in labor camp in China attempt to adopt the Chinese way of thinking and atmosphere. To go China, the medium of communication is Chinese. Therefore, the Tibetans struggle to learn Chinese to communicate. After that, they are engaging into the Chinese characteristic of economic system. They slowly adopt the Chinese way of thinking and its atmosphere. After 10 or 20 years, these Tibetans already incorporate into the Chinese way of life rather than their Tibetan way of thinking. After all, these Tibetans hardly exit from the Chinese system, even if they feel to come out. So this is how China systematically syncretizing the Tibetans into the Chinese characteristic of socialism. My third point here is that Tibetan youth are forcefully recruiting into the People's Liberation of Army and local militia. So in this context, my research findings are a little bit, the difference what Indian media's, output came the recently. In this context, I have different views as compared to what Indian media viewed about it. Tibetans are hardly recruited into PLA, Popular Army. So this is my finding. Actually, it's a little bit different what you can find in the Indian media, because the China doesn't trust the Tibetan anymore. Here are two reasons. First reason, the Chinese are hardly trust the Tibetan, especially after collapse of Soviet Union in 1989. The Chinese are reduced the recruiting Tibetan army into the PLA force. For that, the Chinese authority has making different excuses and criteria for Tibetans to make not applicable to join into the PLA force because of China took an example. Forget it about that. The recent news of the Chinese recruiting Tibetan youth in PLA and giving military-style training to the Tibetan primary is just a propaganda that China wants to show the world. And because to challenge the contribution of the Special Frontier Force at the height of the Indo-Tibetan border, the second reason is that to teach the military-style discipline for the Tibetan youth to give loyalty to the Chinese Communist Party, this Chinese authority giving the military education to Tibetan youth for maintaining law and order. In fact, the Chinese authority has no confidence to give the real military training to the Tibetan youth. My fourth point here is that Tibetans have been subjugated to genetic engineering. So this is the serious implication and to get or to eradicate the Tibetan identity in the near future. China has conducting the military biological research on the Tibetan DNA. So that is the genetic engineering. As per recent report from Tibet, the Chinese authority has collecting millions of the Tibetan DNA sample across the Tibetan plateau for further researching the nature of the Tibetan genetic. This Chinese research policy has very serious implication in long term to destroy the complete Tibetan race and identity. In fact, China doesn't want the Tibetan people. As I already mentioned above, China wants the Tibetan resources and its land. So these are serious implications. The first implication is that China tried to prove that the Tibetan peoples belongs to the Han Chinese race. For this hypothesis, they want to prove that it through the DNA sample test. If it becomes a success, China could destroy the origination of Tibetan civilization in the world history. Second implication, China gathered Tibetan DNA and tried to destroy the Tibetan people by using virus disease to genocide the Tibetan race through the biological warfare. So I think many of you know about because we all are suffering about COVID and all these things. So this is not surprise to China to destroy the particular ethnic. So it has long history because China has subjugated or destroyed so many ethnics in China. So we don't need to go through the detail about historical context. The third implication is that for genetic engineering in Tibet, it deals with the Chinese version of stability of Tibet. Tibet is high and cold, its climate is very harsh. So the Chinese are hardly survive in Tibet, especially in Indo-Tibet borderland in the Himalaya region. By testing and searching on Tibetan genetic and applying to the mainland Chinese to adopt or stay a long time in the high altitude areas such as Indo-Tibet border region, it deals with the Chinese expansionist policy in South Asia and beyond that. So with this reference of China's Tibet policy, I conclude that China wantonly cracked down the Tibetan identity in Tibet today So these Chinese policies and programs are completely against the wish of the Tibetan people. These are mainly for syncretizing, exploiting Tibetan resources and people, and to destroy the Tibetan identity and its culture. With this, I conclude here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dorji, for a very informative brief. Thank you for sharing the findings from your paper, as well as some important aspects that you have introduced to this debate. I would like to quickly move on to the Q&A session since Ms. Cheney has to leave really quickly. So I would just like to address the first question to Ms. Cheney, if that is okay. Firstly, Ms. Cheney, I would like to thank you for acknowledging the disenfranchised population of, the Canadian soil, because it is important for us to remember at all times, the lands and the labor of the people who we stand upon. And it is very, very important that you mentioned that fact. The question that is directed towards you, Ms. Cheney, would be around the sinicization that you were mentioning in your speech as well. So, how vital is freedom of Tibet from CCP's oppression going to prove for Asia's future? And since the Chinese government has been trying to garb their sinicization movement, um, uh, as an economic development, so to speak, but ultimately it's a cultural genocide as per the perspective of the Tibetan people. So, what is your view on that? Can you elaborate more on these strategies of sinicization, so to speak, and how are these going to impact on Asia's future?
Thanks for the question. Based on my understanding of the question, I'll try to respond accordingly. What is at stake, as I mentioned earlier, is just international peace. In every concept of democracy and freedom that we enjoy in our current world is actually at stake. If one actually looks at the trajectory at what the Chinese government has been doing and will continue to do and has been continuing to do with its expansionist projects, we're not just talking about Tibet, and let me remind you again, the Tibetans have been here in the long game. They've been saying this for 7 decades and over about the true colors of the Chinese government. But now, I always make the example of Olympics. 2008 Olympics, Hong Kongers were cheering on the Chinese team during that time. 2022, they were standing with us together, protesting against China, calling for a boycott Beijing 2022. Situation has changed this much in 1 decade. It is only going to get worse. We already know that, South China Sea, the seaports in Sri Lanka, so many different nations within Africa are genuinely just owned by China. So much so that, even in Canada, when I lobby sort of Canadian government officials, parts of Canadian soil could be actually linked back to China, basically owned by them. And these are all because of the expansionist projects. So what is at stake is any values that you have, that you value in this free world, is actually at stake. And we see that right now, with what's going on with Ukraine and Russia. Authoritarian states are not backing down, and it's actually going to be a huge threat, not just for India and Tibet and other sort of regions nearby. It's actually a conversation to be had on the international stage. And then earlier, I've already mentioned the value Tibet holds for China, right? From resources to its strategic, it being sort of the entrance or the back door to China in terms of being able to have physical access to China. And yeah, I think the list is endless. However, any sort of value that you folks sort of treasure in the West, I think, is actually at stake. And we should act sooner than later, because China is definitely not going to wait for us to sort of react. And as you can see already with the tensions leading up in the borders of India, it's important that we raise the Tibetan issue and talk about Tibet. And this I mention again for the Indian parliamentarians, our fellow Indian brothers and sisters who are watching. Everyone has a role to play in this. It's not just for Tibet, it's actually for the benefit of all humans.
Thank you, Ms. Cheney, for that answer. I think you will have to leave because you would have to attend office. So please go ahead. You can leave. We will continue with the session with the other speakers. We hope to see you soon again in another version of the webinar, hopefully. So have a good day. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for hosting me, and it was a pleasure sharing space with Sawandojala and Jamila. So take care, folks. Cheers.
Take care.
Bye now.
Mr. Jigme, have you been able to join us again? Mr. Jigme was facing some network issue. So,
Yes, am I audible?
yes, sir. Yes, sir. You're audible. Yes, sir.
Okay.
So, and we missed the last part of your speech actually, but without going back to it, I would just like to direct the question through by answering which you may again refer to the last part of your speech. The question is this: the Communist Party of China is known to be a threat to not only Tibet and its national, but also by and large a threat to global peace, as Ms. Cheney was also mentioning. And so there are serious implications on the future of global peace in general and the Asian situation to be specific. Can you elaborate a little bit on the Asian implication? Ms. Cheney has already elaborated on the global platform that, how China has been controlling so much of land and ports and resources. Is it true for Asia as well? And you were also mentioning the importance of, the position of the geopolitical importance of Tibet's position between India and China. So we would really like to do a little bit more on that.
Yeah, thank you very much. Before I make my comment on this question that you have raised, I would first of all would also like to apologize for the problem of network that I faced from my end. And at the same time, I would appreciate and of course thank my colleagues for very insightful presentation they had, unlike mine. Because I moved from Delhi police gypsies to Parliament Street without those PowerPoint presentations. So normally when I get invitation for these kind of programs, so I always speak whatever there is in my memory and experience, both in paper and also on physical form. So yes, getting back to your question about the CCP's impact, particularly on the Asian globe or the Asian continent, I think this is something very obvious because China today, if you see both from population, landscape, and then the economic control, the kind of backdoor policy that they have been doing, and then on the other side, now India, it's a developing country, but at the same time, India has huge potential. So if you remember one of the remarks made by the then finance minister Chidambaram, what he mentioned was that the economic growth of China is like a leopard's leap. But then he said that the economic growth of India at that point of time, it's an elephant step. So the elephant step is more stable than the leopard's leap, I think. So now we see today the condition of India around our own neighbors. If you visit Bangladesh, Dhaka, and you come back, then you might, I think, kiss this land of India, the Arya Bhumi, I guess. If you visit Afghanistan and of course Pakistan. So now the problem is China is very much concerned about this growth of India, for instance. And therefore, they feel insecure about this India's growth because their communist thought is very much on this basic understanding or the philosophy or the concept of expansionism. This is what they say in Hindi, कि चीन की सीमा चीन का द्वार बाकी सब है उसका कब्जा. And that's why they have this, the Great Wall of China built within that, corridors. Otherwise, they should have, beyond the extension of not only Tibet, but Uyghurs or Xinjiang, whatever they say. So, technically speaking, that invasion of Tibet or the crackdown upon Tibet, it's not only a crackdown of an individual. I think it's a crackdown of a language, of a heritage that has long relationship with India, as I mentioned before. Therefore, as I was sharing, Abhay means fearless, Jigme means fearless, and Sultrim means shield one. If you go with this language, pure in English, in Hindi it's called Shuddh. In Tibetan we call Thakpa. Now impure becomes Mathakpa, and then Vishuddh becomes number Thakpa, and some Shuddh becomes Yongsu Thakpa. But the real object, the dhatu which you say, it's the same word that's called Thakpa. So from the cultural, from the literature, from any source of angle, if you see and compare the understanding of the basic relationship between India and Tibet, it goes back to the century, I think. And then therefore, I believe on my personal experience that through these kind of engagement, I think it's very important to reach out more Indian in different levels, I think. Now, here you have this is an international affair sort of a platform to engage into these issues, but then you have at the village level, at the school level, at the college level, at the university level, at the think tank level. So, depending upon different levels, I think you have to engage more with more people and reaching out with the basic concept of what Tibet and what India does really shares. And if you have this knowledge, I'm certain and I'm very much optimistic that China's influence on Tibet now, as the other former speaker Chimila has mentioned, that Taiwan, then Hong Kong, Uyghur, now they are all standing up. This is what now they are, they are facing with, they're experiencing with. And now you have seen the Doklam, and I'm sure in a couple of years ahead, Nepal will see the reality, unfortunately. And then these things are coming up. So therefore, this is the time that we in India, on the on the whole, we have to work, we have to multiply, we have to energize, we have to potentialize these sources, of course, on an academic background. So therefore, if this question is being raised somewhere in a school, that as a person, what I can do in this regard. So I used to say, you study yourself first, then try to reach out. What are the facts? What are the distortions? And see the understanding of the real Chinese in China also. Then you will come to a conclusion that how effective that can be approached. I think I should end here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jigme, for that answer. I think I can speak for everyone amongst us when I say that the way you speak, the passion in your speech speaks volumes about your experiences and your perspectives. So there's no need to worry about presentations or papers. So thank you very much for that perspective. As we're running out of time today, unfortunately, so we will have to wrap up really quickly. I would like to invite Anisha for delivering the end note. Over to you, Anisha.
Suji, I hope I am loud. Sindhuji, you're on. Am I audible? Suji, you are on. Meji, am I audible? I hope. Thank you so much, everyone. Very good evening to all present. It is my esteemed privilege to deliver the official vote of thanks on behalf of
And I, Anisha, propose a vote of thanks to all the distinguished speakers who have a very pressing issue at hand. Definitely was a wonderful opportunity to hear from all of you. And we do look forward to similar experiences and creative opportunities for us in near future. And I also thank all the participants of this. But thank you everyone who had joined, and kind permission of the speakers, we would like to close today's session with the promise of joining again. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much. See you
Thank
all
you.
again.
So